should have known something was wrong when I saw tiny handprints frosting over the window from the inside. But $500 is $500, and student loans don't pay themselves. I'm recording this now because I don't think I'll be able to speak soon. My tongue is turning black, and the twins say that means I'm almost ready. If you're listening to this, don't take the babysitting job at 12 Raven Street. The rules aren't meant to save you, they're meant to transform you. It started 3 days ago, or maybe it was 3 weeks. Time moves differently in this house, stretching and contracting like a cat arching its back. I remember scrolling through local job listings on my phone, my finger leaving streaks on the cracked screen. The posting appeared between one swipe and the next. Experienced babysitter needed. Historic home seeking responsible individual. 1 night only, $500. Photography experience preferred. Must be exactly 21 years old, no exceptions. I should have questioned why anyone would care about the exact age of their babysitter. I should have wondered why they needed someone with photography experience to watch children. But the truth is, my bank account was as cracked as my phone screen, and my final photography project wasn't going to fund itself. The application process was simple. A phone call to a number that showed up as unavailable. Mrs. McKinnon's voice crackled through the speaker like autumn leaves underfoot. Static punctuated her words at odd intervals, especially when I asked about Mr. McKinnon.
The children are well behaved,
She said, her voice distant despite my phone being pressed against my ear.
Oliver and Olivia are special. You'll understand when you meet them. Come at sunset. Not before, not after. Sunset exactly.
I arrived at 12 Raven Street as the sun painted the sky in shades of bruised flesh. The Victorian house loomed against the darkening clouds, its windows reflecting the last gasps of daylight. As I walked up the path, the dead leaves crunched beneath my feet, whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. My vintage Nikon F2 hung heavy around my neck, and brought it on impulse, though Mrs. McKinnon hadn't mentioned photography again. The first strange thing I noticed was the temperature drop. October in New England is cold, but the air around the house felt like December. My breath clouded in front of me as I approached the porch, the wooden steps groaning beneath my weight in a way that sounded almost like words. The door opened before I could knock. Mrs. McKinnon stood in the threshold, her smile as crisp as the autumn air. She wore a high-necked black dress that could have been fashionable in any decade from the last 100 years. Something about her face seemed familiar, like a photograph I'd taken but couldn't quite remember.
Iris Winter,
She said, and a chill ran down my spine at how she savored my name.
how appropriate. Please, come in. The children are so excited to meet you.
The foyer smelled of copper and old books. A grandfather clock ticked rhythmically, its pendulum swinging in jerky motions as if underwater. Family photographs lined the walls, but they were all slightly out of focus, as if their subjects had moved at the exact moment of exposure.
Oliver and Olivia are sitting in the room.
Mrs. McKinnon said, leading me past the photographs.
They're very well behaved. They know what happens when they're not.
The sitting room was a perfect tableau of Victorian elegance, frozen in time. Heavy velvet curtains framed windows that looked out onto a garden I could have sworn wasn't there when I walked up. A rocking chair swayed gently in a non-existent breeze, and there, in the center of the room, stood the twins. They didn't walk into the room. They flickered, like old frames missing their middle sequences. One moment the room was empty, and the next, Oliver and Olivia stood before me. They wore matching outfits. He in a navy blue sweater vest and shorts, she in a navy blue pinafore dress. Their skin was pale as porcelain, their dark hair perfectly combed, and their smiles identical down to the slightly too sharp canines.
Hello, Mrs. Winter.
They said in perfect unison, but their words were slightly out of sync, creating an echo that made my teeth ache.
Will you stay forever? The others didn't last.
Mrs. McKinnon's laugh sounded like breaking glass.
Children, remember your manners. Miss Winter is here to care for you while I attend to Important matters.
I watched as she walked to a heavy wooden desk and began writing something in quick, sharp motions. The twins' eyes followed her pen, their heads turning in exact synchronization. The scratch of the pen against paper seemed too loud, too wet.
Everything you need to know is in here.
Mrs. McKinnon said, folding the paper and sealing it in an envelope. She placed it on the kitchen counter, her red fingernails clicking against the marble.
I must leave immediately. Time is of the essence.
She moved to the door with unusual urgency, her heels clicking against the hardwood in that same rhythmic pattern as the grandfather clock. At the threshold, she paused and turned back to me. For a moment, just a moment, her face seemed to flicker like the twins had, showing something older, something familiar.
Oh, an iris.
Her smile stretched too wide, skin cracking at the corners.
You brought your camera. Perfect. We need to capture everything.
The door behind her closed with the finality of a coffin lid. I turned back to the twins, but they had moved without walking again, now standing at the base of the grand staircase. Their shadows stretched behind them, merging into a single dark shape that didn't match either of their poses.
We want to show you something.
Oliver said.
Something special.
Olivia continued.
Something that belongs to you.
They finished together. From upstairs came the faint, tinkling notes of a music box. The envelope Mrs. McKinnon left seemed to pulse on the counter, like a paper heart waiting to reveal its secrets. As I reached for it, the twin shadows stretched longer, darker, climbing the walls like ivy. The music box melody grew louder, and I could have sworn I heard children's laughter layered beneath the notes. My fingers trembled as I picked up the envelope. The paper felt warm, almost alive, and as I began to tear it open, I heard the twins whisper in that terrible unison.
Now you'll learn the rules, Miss Winter. All the rules that keep us safe. All the rules that keep us here. All the rules that make you ready.
The first droplet of red seeped through the envelope seal, and somewhere in the house a door clicked shut. The envelope pulsed against my fingers like a living thing, warm and wet. Red ink, at least I hoped it was ink, seeped through the paper in delicate spirals. As I slid my fingers under the seal, the grandfather clock struck 7, its chimes discordant and wrong, each strike a different pitch that made my skull vibrate. The twins were suddenly beside me, though I hadn't seen them move. Their shadows still clung to the staircase wall, stretching incredibly long. Even though they now stood in the kitchen, the music box upstairs played on, its melody distorting into something that almost sounded like words. Inside the envelope, I found pages of handwritten text. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, and covered in different hands. Some elegant and flowing, others jagged and desperate. Lines were crossed out, rewritten and crossed out again. Traces of older writing showed through, like palimpsests of forgotten warnings. But it was the most recent handwriting that made my blood run cold. I recognized it. It was mine. Rules must be followed exactly. Previous rules crossed out and rewritten, some in fading ink, some in darker substances. I began to read. 1. Never answer if a man claims to be Mr. McKinnon. There is no Mr. McKinnon. There never was. 2. The children must finish dinner by 7 o'clock p.m. They will ask for spaghetti. Do not serve it. Below this, in smaller, shakier writing, the noodles aren't noodles. God help me. They're not noodles. 3. If you hear the Jack-in-the-Box music, take them to the kitchen. Sing Ring Around the Rosie. Don't stop until the music does. Corner note. 15 hours is the longest recorded singing time. 4. Check under their beds at night. Removed any stuffed animals. Don't ask why they're there. Scratched into the paper. They weren't there before. They're never there before. 5. The attic door will unlock at 10:23 p.m. Lock it immediately. If children laugh, lock it twice. If an adult laughs, run. Margin note in faded red. Running doesn't help. It just makes the laughter follow. 6. The black cat stays on the windowsill. If it moves, close every curtain. Do not look outside until it returns. Written in shaky letters. It's not a cat. It was never a cat. 7. Upstairs bathroom is forbidden after 8 p.m. If you hear running water, call me. Don't investigate. Below in different handwriting. The water runs red, then black. Then it's not water anymore. 8. The rocking chair moves by itself. If it stops, photograph it and send the image. Wait for my response. Corner note. The camera shows what's really sitting there. 9. Only read the blue book. They'll ask for others. They know better. Margin. The other books read themselves. The other books read you. 10. Lights off in order. Kitchen, living room, hallway, porch. If any come back on, leave. Final note. They always come back on. They want you to see what's waiting. P.S. If you see a third child, ignore it. We only have twins. P.P.S. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. As I finished reading, I heard Oliver and Olivia speak in their unsettling unison.
It's 6:58, Miss Winter. We're hungry.
The clock confirmed their words. Though its hands seemed to twitch and shudder as they moved, my phone read 3:47 a.m., then 11:22 p.m., then went back entirely.
We want spaghetti.
Oliver said, his voice coming from behind me.
We always have spaghetti first.
Olivia added, her voice somehow coming from the same spot.
The last babysitter made us spaghetti.
They said together, and I could hear their smiles. I turned to face them, their rules crinkling in my trembling hands. They stood too close, their faces upturned, their eyes reflecting light that wasn't there. Behind them, their single shadow writhed on the wall.
I don't think I should make spaghetti.
I said, trying to keep my voice steady.
Maybe we could have something else.
Their smiles widened in perfect synchronization, teeth gleaming.
But we're so hungry, Miss Winter. So very hungry. And look, the pantry's already open.
I hadn't opened the pantry. I hadn't even noticed it before, but there it stood. Door yawning wide, darkness breathing from within. On the middle shelf, a single box of spaghetti waited. My fingers moved towards the phone, remembering the rule about calling Mrs. McKinnon. But when I tried to unlock it, the screen showed only static, numbers and letters crawling across it like insects.
It won't work.
Oliver whispered.
Nothing works when we're hungry.
Olivia added.
Except spaghetti.
They finished together. I reached for the box. The pasta rattled inside, but the sound was wrong, too organic, too alive. The preparation instructions were written in that same handwriting, my handwriting. Water boiled in a pot I didn't remember filling. Steam rose in shapes that looked like screaming faces. The twins sat at the kitchen table, hair scraping across the floor in unison as they settled in. Their feet didn't quite touch the ground, swinging in perfect rhythm.
7 o'clock.
They announced as I drained the pasta. The spaghetti writhed in the colander, steaming tendrils curling like fingers. When I placed their plates before them, the noodles arranged themselves into spiral patterns. Oliver took the first bite, and I watched in horror as the pasta squirmed up through his nose. Olivia giggled, her mouth stretching impossibly wide as she whispered,
Now we have to show you what happened to the last babysitter who broke this rule.
The kitchen radio clicked on by itself, static hissing through the speakers. Then, beneath the white noise, I heard it, ring around the rosy, playing backwards, accompanied by the wet sounds of chewing. From upstairs, the music box began to play. The twins stood up from their half-finished meals, pasta still dangling from Oliver's nose, sauce dripping from Olivia's too wide smile. They reached for my hands, their fingers cold and damp.
Time to dance, Miss Winter.
They said in unison.
The Jack-in-the-Box is waiting.
Their single shadows stretched ahead of us as they led me towards the stairs, the music growing louder with each step. Behind us, I could hear the spaghetti slithering off their plates, following like hungry snakes. At the top of the stairs, a door stood open that I hadn't noticed before. Inside, on a shelf too high for the twins to reach, sat an antique jack-in-the-box. Its handle turned slowly clockwise, then counterclockwise, playing that terrible tune.
Sing.
The twins commanded.
Sing until it stops. Ring around the rosy.
I began, my voice shaking.
Louder.
They insisted.
The last babysitter sang for 15 hours. Let's see if you can beat her record.
As I sang, I saw movement under the beds. Stuffed animals emerging from the shadows, crawling on stick-limb appendages. The black cat watched from the windowsill, its tail keeping time, its eyes reflecting my face. Aging, changing, becoming something else. The grandfather clock struck 7:30, though its face still read 7 o'clock. Outside, darkness pressed against the windows like a living thing. Somewhere in the house, water began to run. My reflection in the twins' mirror smiled back at me with Mrs. McKinnon's face. The mirror rippled like disturbed water as Mrs. McKinnon's face, my face, smiled back at me. My throat was raw from singing, but I didn't dare stop. The jack-in-the-box continued its twisted melody, handle turning on its own, each rotation making the twins' smile stretch wider. That's when I saw it in the mirror's warped surface, a third reflection standing between Oliver and Olivia, a child enclosed from another era, face obscured by shadow, reaching toward me with fingers that were too long, too sharp.
15 hours and 1 minute.
The twins announced in unison.
You've beaten the record.
The jack-in-the-box music stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of running water from the forbidden bathroom and my ragged breathing. When I turned away from the mirror, my neck cracking from hours of stillness, I saw the true horror of what had happened while I sang. The rules list had multiplied, wallpapering the room in hundreds of versions, each in different handwriting. They crawled across the walls like ivy, some written in ink, others in darker substances. I summoned closer to read one. Rules for surviving the night, 1887. Never let the children divide. The mirrors lie, but they show truth. Count the shadows, not the children. Time moves differently after dark. Another dated 1923. Rules for the mother. Your face will change first. The camera captures what you're becoming. Don't count the teeth while they smile. The house remembers everything. 1956. Important instructions. The third child is a warning. Your reflection belongs to the house now. The rules change when you're not looking. There is no escape through the attic. And the most disturbing of all, in my own handwriting but dated next week, rules for the next babysitter. I'm sorry I brought the camera. The photographs show what's coming. The twins are hungry again. You're already here. You just don't know it yet.
We love it when they notice.
Oliver whispered from behind me.
They always notice too late.
Olivia added from the same spot.
Just like you did.
They finished together. I spun around, my camera swinging on its strap. When it clicked, the flash illuminated something that made me gag. The shadow wasn't just merged. It was moving independently, reaching for me with limbs that shouldn't exist. To develop photos would be worse. I fumbled with my camera, hands shaking as I advanced the film. Each photo ejected showed a different version of the twins. In one, they wore clothes from the 1800s. In another, their faces were obscured by static, but it was the third photo that made my heart stop. It showed me standing between them, wearing Mrs. McKinnon's dress, my face a blur of transformation.
The camera never lies.
Oliver said, peering at the photos.
But it does predict.
Olivia added, her finger tracing my blurred face.
Would you like to see the others?
They asked together. Before I could answer, the black cat on the windowsill stood up. Its movement was wrong, jerky, like stop-motion animation. As it leaped down into the darkness outside, I remembered the rule and rushed to close the curtains. I was too late. Through the window, I saw hundreds of faces pressed against the glass. All my face, all Mrs. McKinnon's face, aging and de-aging, transforming and untransforming. They mouthed words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. Welcome home. The twins appeared beside me, their cold hands taking mine.
Look at what you made us do.
They said, their voices layered with others.
Now we have to show you everything.
They led me to a drawer I hadn't noticed before, their single shadow flowing ahead like spilled ink. Inside were stacks of rule lists, each written by a different babysitter, each ending with the same desperate warnings, each signed with my name.
Time works differently here.
Oliver explained, pulling out a newspaper.
The house likes to collect moments.
Olivia continued, showing me the date.
Like this one.
They said together. The newspaper showed my own missing person report, dated next week. The attic door unlocked with a sound like breaking bones. 10:23 p.m., right on schedule. Children's laughter echoed down the stairs, followed by an adult's deeper chuckle. The twins' grips tightened on my hand.
Don't you want to know where the other children went?
Oliver asked.
Don't you want to know where you'll go?
Olivia whispered.
Don't you want to know why we're always hungry?
They breathed in unison. The rocking chair stopped its eternal motion. My camera triggered automatically, capturing whatever sat there, invisible to my eyes but not to the lens. When the photo developed, it showed all the previous babysitters, their faces transforming in sequence, ending with my own future face. From the forbidden bathroom, the water stopped running. In the sudden silence, I heard something worse. Wet footsteps approaching, accompanied by the dragging sound of something heavy. The twins pulled out a red book instead of the blue one.
Story time,
They announced. Inside were newspaper clippings about missing babysitters, each photo showing the same face at different ages. My face, Mrs. McKinnon's face, the house's face.
You're wondering about the third child.
They said, their voices echoing strangely.
The one in the mirror, the one in the photographs, the one that's been standing behind you since you arrived.
I turned around slowly, my camera clicking one last time. The flash illuminated a figure that shouldn't exist. A child wearing my face but younger, older, transformed. It held out a stuffed animal I recognized from my own childhood.
Tag,
It whispered in my voice.
you're it.
The stuffed animal in my childhood doppelganger's hands was Mr. Whiskers, my old rabbit, the one that disappeared the night before my 21st birthday. Its fur was matted with something dark, its button eyes replaced with small, ticking clock faces. As I watched, the minute hand spun backward, counting down to something I didn't want to understand. The third child, the one wearing my younger face, stepped closer. Its movements were liquid, like photography chemicals running down paper.
Did you think the rules were to protect you?
It asked with my voice but layered with every Mrs. McKinnon who came before.
They're to prepare you, to ripen you, to make you ready for your true face.
Behind me, Oliver and Olivia spoke in that terrible unison.
Show her that last rule, sister mother, the one written in invisible ink.
The rules list in my hands began to change. Heat spread through the paper and new words emerged like developing photographs, written in what looked like luminescent silver. Rule 11, the final transformation. The babysitter must become the new Mrs. McKinnon before sunrise. Time is a circle in this house. Every Mrs. McKinnon was once Iris Winter. Every Iris Winter becomes Mrs. McKinnon. The house must be fed. The children must be kept. The cycle must continue. We are all you. You are all us. Forever. My camera clicked by itself. The flash illuminating the room in strobes, each burst of light showed a different version of the scene. The twins as they were in different decades. The third child aging and de-aging. My own reflection rippling through time like a stone dropped in still water.
The house chose you long ago.
The third child said, holding up Mr. Whiskers.
It's been watching you through every photograph you've ever taken, every reflection you've ever cast, every shadow you've ever made.
The developed photos fell from my camera like autumn leaves, each showing a moment from my life, but wrong. Things I didn't remember. Me at 6 years old standing in front of 12 Raven Street. Me at 12 watching the twins through the window. Me at 16 taking pictures of the house I'd never seen before. Me at 20 wearing Mrs. McKinnon's dress. Me tomorrow with a face that wasn't quite mine anymore.
Time doesn't work right here.
Oliver explained, his voice distant.
The house exists in every moment.
Olivia continued, her voice closer.
And so do you.
They finished, their voices coming from my own mouth. The grandfather clock began to chime, but instead of counting hours, it called out names. Every Mrs. McKinnon, every Iris Winter, every iteration of myself echoing through the house's twisted timeline.
Why me?
I managed to ask, though my tongue felt strange in my mouth. Too long, too dark, too much like the thing that used to be spaghetti. The third child smiled with too many teeth.
Because you were always us. Every photograph you've taken was practice. Every shadow you've cast was a rehearsal. Every reflection was a preview.
My camera's viewfinder showed the truth. The house wasn't a house at all, but a massive aperture. A lens through which time itself was being filtered and exposed. Each room was a camera obscura, capturing and transforming moments, developing new realities in its dark chemical baths of rules and consequences. The twins stepped through me, not around, but through, their bodies passing through mine like double exposure.
The house is hungry,
They said from inside my chest.
It feeds on time, on choices, on transformations, and you, Iris Winter, are the perfect feast.
My finger traced Rule 11 again, and I understood with horrible clarity. The house hadn't chosen me. I had chosen it, would choose it, will always choose it. Every photograph I'd ever taken was just practice for capturing souls. Every rule I'd follow was practice for writing new ones. The third child, my past, my future, my eternal present, held out Mrs. McKinnon's dress. It was made of developed photographs, each one showing a different version of me putting it on.
You have a choice.
The twins said from behind my eyes.
Become Mrs. McKinnon willingly. Join the eternal moment. Keep the children safe in their forever frame. Or let the house take them. Let it consume their time, their essence, their existence. But they're not really children.
I said, even as my hands reached for the dress.
No,
My other self smiled.
they're photographs, moments, captured fragments of time. Just like you're about to be.
My camera clicked one final time as I slipped the dress over my head. The developed image showed what I was becoming. Every Mrs. McKinnon, every Iris Winter, every moment of my eternal existence in this light trap of a house. But as the transformation began, as I felt my face becoming every face it had ever been and would be, I had one last revelation. My fingers found my camera's film compartment, and I knew what I had to do.
The house needs photographs to be fed.
I whispered through my changing mouth.
It needs exposure to exist. It needs rules to maintain its developer bath of reality.
The twins' single shadow wavered. The third child's face flickered. Even the house itself seemed to hold its breath.
But what happens
I asked, opening the film compartment.
if I overexpose everything?
My hands moved with the certainty of someone who had performed this action countless times across countless lifetimes. The film unspooled like time itself, catching the light, destroying every image, burning away every moment the house had ever captured. The twins screamed in frequencies that shattered the mirrors. The third child began to fade like an overexposed negative. The house's walls rippled like disturbed chemistry, but I wasn't trying to escape, I was trying to save everyone. Light flooded every room, every moment, every version of myself. The rules list burned away like flash paper. The photographs curled and blackened, time itself overexposed, bleached, transformed. In that final moment of pure light, I understood the real truth. The house hadn't been containing us. We had been containing it.
My turn to make the rules.
I said through a mouth that was both mine and everyone's, and in the darkness of that eternal dark room, I began to write. Rule 1, time flows forward again. Rule 2, children are children, not photographs. Rule 3, the house serves us, not itself. Rule 4, every reflection shows only truth. Rule 5, the past stays developed. Rule 6, the future remains unwritten. Rule 7, this story ends. The last photograph developed in reverse, showing a normal house, normal children, normal time. My camera clicked one final time, capturing the moment everything changed. Or maybe it was the moment everything stayed the same. I still babysit at 12 Raven Street. The twins are still Oliver and Olivia. I'm still Iris Winter, or maybe Mrs. McKinnon, or possibly both, or neither. The house still stands, time still flows, but now we control the exposure. And if you see a third child, well, that's just a trick of the light. Just don't ask about the rules in the attic, or the camera that takes pictures of tomorrow, or the babysitter who changed everything by breaking all the rules at once. After all, every good photograph needs both light and shadow, and every good story needs an ending, even if it's also a beginning. And scene. Wow, that was definitely pretty trippy. This was written again by Dr. Whispers, a fellow creator on YouTube. He wrote a story that I read a couple weeks ago, so his channel will be linked in the description, and it should have been on the screen if you're watching the video. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one. I will see you in the next. Igom Bolt Lima Destra.